Both of our readings today speak of the activity of God, beginning with His Word, but continuing in many, many different ways of broadening us out from where we have become accustomed to live our lives of, let's say, comfortable spirituality. Many of us, through a lifetime of devotion, have kind of tamed God after our own way of thinking. And in the twilight hours of our lives, we're kind of comfortable that we have served God, maybe served God well, served God imperfectly, but nonetheless, now it's time for God to reward us for the way that we have served Him. Sadly, interestingly, no, not sadly, but with some difficulty, God kind of says, don't forget who's in charge here. And it's not you. It's God. It's me, God. Now, we see that in both of our readings. That's the import of what St. Paul said to the Galatians. That's the import of what Jesus was saying to the crowds. Don't get complacent in thinking that you've got God in your own little tote bag. But rather, God is going to find ways of nudging or perhaps pushing you and me out of that complacency. One of the people who pushed the church, God's people, out of that complacency was our saint today, Teresa of Avila. She started as a rather conventionally pious person, dedicated to her devotions, but also seeking always the better way. And as a child, as children are accustomed to do, the better way, of course, meant for her the shorter way, the easy way, looking for a shortcut. And so, at age 7, she was a rather precocious little girl, she convinced her older brother, age 11, to go and join her in seeking the easy way to get to heaven. What's the easy way? Martyrdom, of course. Now, the Muslims, 25 years earlier, had been driven out of Spain. So she had to go across the Mediterranean to North Africa in order to be killed, martyred at the hands of Muslims. So they packed up their belongings and escaped. Of course, as children running away from home, they didn't get very far and were brought back. The easy way, the seemingly easy way to get to heaven was closed off to her. She had to seek another way. She was never, ever attracted to marriage. There were only 2 options for young women in those days to live their lives. Period. Only 2 options. Marriage and the religious life. Joining a convent. Marriage had its problems. For one thing, as a married woman, you went from being subjected to your father and his family and household to being subjected to your husband. And that was not attractive to many people. But on the other hand, love kind of conquers all also. The other condition of marriage that was very frightening was that any married woman had a very high likelihood of dying in childbirth. as her father's first wife had done before Teresa was born. So Teresa was actually the daughter of her father's second wife, and she had step-brothers like Rodrigo, over whom, as I mentioned, she had obviously a great influence, at least at that time. Now, the other option was religious life. Living out a single vocation in the world was not open to them at all. So many women joined convents, either willingly or were put there by their families because they were considered to be unmarriageable, or perhaps for a wealthy family of nobility and influence. They might be a stepping stone to some kind of power and prestige in the church, because a lot of convents and monasteries were very wealthy and very powerful. So, anyway, she joined the Carmelites. At first her father opposed, but then he saw some advantage to it. And she lived in a moderately wealthy and moderately conventional Carmelite convent. But she saw the life of that convent being sort of like you give up some things and you gain an awful lot of others as far as comfort and prestige is concerned. She saw that as lacking something. She saw that as lacking love. Love is supposed to be at the heart of a religious conviction, commitment. Love, not of a husband, but of the heavenly spouse, Jesus himself, was what was to motivate a religious woman. And that kind of love, she saw, was just like married love, had to be committed and passionate and productive of children. Who were her children? Her fellow sisters, her daughters, she called them in the convent. And so she became a great reformer, not to make the life of the nuns more rigorous or even more prayerful, but to make them, to inspire them to greater love. That was her commitment. And so the beauty of St. Teresa of Avila for us is that she, in her own mystical way of living, married Jesus, of course, but lived that marriage in a way that brought together passionate love and maternity. A maternity manifested in her deeply devoted and dedicated care for her other sisters. That wasn't always popular, and she was hounded from place to place and had to establish her own community of Carmelite sisters in order to fulfill that, because she was not accepted in the more traditional convents where they had made sort of an accommodation, just as, of course, many married people do, an accommodation of sort of between love and self-centeredness. So she said, no, we can't make that accommodation. That love has to be total, committed, and passionate, and has to be lived out in the care and nurturing of others, the care and nurturing of children. And so that's why she was named a doctor of the church. She had a very unique and new way of committing oneself to the Lord Jesus by living a life that was poured out on behalf of his people. In that, I think she is a wonderful model for all of us, whether we are committed in one way or another to religious life or marriage, widowhood, all of those things. We love deeply, and because we love deeply, we serve the Lord's people.
A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Galatians. Brothers and sisters, it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the slave woman and the other by the freeborn woman. The son of the slave woman was born naturally. The son of the freeborn through a promise. Now this is an allegory. These women represent 2 covenants. One was from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. This is Hagar. But the Jerusalem above is freeborn, and she is our mother. For it is written, "Rejoice, you barren one who bore no children. Break forth and shout, you who were not in labor. For more numerous are the children of the deserted one than of her who has a husband." Therefore, brothers and sisters, we are children not of the slave woman, but of the freeborn woman. For freedom, Christ set us free. So stand firm and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. The word of the Lord.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. While still more people gathered in the crowd, Jesus said to them, "This generation is an evil generation. It seeks a sign, but no sign will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. At the judgment, the Queen of the South will rise with the men of this generation, and she will condemn them, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And there is something greater than Solomon here. At the judgment, the men of Nineveh will arise with this generation and condemn it, because at the preaching of Jonah, they repented. And there is something greater than Jonah here." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise